They called me a gold digger while I sobbed on their marble floor, 7 months pregnant. His mother threw my suitcase out, laughing. They didn't know I'd built a billion-dollar empire in secret. 5 years later, I returned, not for revenge, but to show them exactly what they'd thrown away. Before we begin, if you love stories about karma and sweet justice, hit that like button right now and subscribe. Trust me, you won't believe how this ends. This is my story, and I'm sharing it because someone out there needs to hear how your lowest moment can become your launching pad. My name is Natasha Cole, and 5 years ago, I was someone completely different. I was Natasha Whitmore, 7 months pregnant, crying on the floor of a mansion that never felt like home, surrounded by people who never saw me as family. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how I got there. To appreciate where I am now, I met Daniel at a charity gala 2 years before that terrible night. I was 25, running a small tech startup focused on artificial intelligence for healthcare. The company was struggling, but I believed in the mission with everything I had. I'd grown up watching my grandmother die because she couldn't afford proper medical care, couldn't navigate the complicated healthcare system, couldn't get doctors to take her seriously. I wanted to build something that would help people like her. Daniel seemed to believe in it too. He was charming, handsome, and when he looked at me, I felt seen. We fell fast, maybe too fast. 6 months later, we were married. That's when I met the real Whitmore family. His mother, Victoria, had ice in her veins and judgment in her eyes from the moment we met. His father, Christopher, barely acknowledged my existence unless it was to remind Daniel about family legacy. His sister, Bethany, treated me like a temporary inconvenience. But Daniel promised me it would get better. He promised he'd stand by me. He promised a lot of things. When I got pregnant, I thought maybe a grandchild would soften them. I was so naive. Instead, Victoria started making comments about timing, about whether I'd planned this. Christopher would joke about paternity tests at family dinners, while Daniel laughed nervously and changed the subject. I swallowed every insult, every microaggression, every moment of disrespect, because I loved my husband and I was carrying his child. I told myself that love would be enough. That December night, 7 months pregnant, Victoria called a family dinner. She said it was important. I wore a cream maternity dress, did my hair perfectly, practiced my smile in the mirror. I was still trying to win them over, still trying to belong. The dining room was decorated for Christmas, all white and gold, expensive and cold, just like them. We sat down to dinner, and I noticed an extra place setting. Victoria smiled that shark smile of hers and said they'd invited a special guest. Catherine walked in, blonde, polished, from a family even wealthier than the Whitmores, Bethany's childhood friend. Victoria seated her right next to Daniel. Throughout dinner, Victoria and Christopher gushed about Catherine's accomplishments, her family's real estate portfolio, her impeccable breeding. They talked about how she and Daniel used to play together as children, how everyone always thought they'd end up together. Daniel said nothing. He cut his steak and avoided my eyes while I sat there, pregnant with his child, being erased. After dinner, Victoria stood up and clinked her glass. She announced that she'd been speaking with Catherine's family about a business merger. She said Daniel would be leading the partnership, working closely with Catherine. She looked right at me when she said, "It's important to surround yourself with the right kind of people, the kind who understand our world." That's when I snapped. I stood up, my hands shaking, and I asked Daniel directly if he was going to let his mother disrespect me like this. I asked him to tell them that I was his wife, that I was carrying his child, that I deserved basic human respect. The room went silent. Victoria's face hardened. Christopher leaned back in his chair with this amused expression. Bethany actually giggled. And Daniel, my husband, the father of my unborn child, looked down at his plate and said nothing. Victoria stood up and walked toward me slowly. She said, "Let's be honest about what this is." You trapped my son with that pregnancy. We all know exactly what you are. A girl from nowhere with a failing company, looking for a meal ticket. You saw an opportunity and you took it, but you don't belong here, and you never will. I felt tears streaming down my face. I couldn't stop them. I was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, hormonal, and completely broken. I begged Daniel to say something, anything. I actually got on my knees on that marble floor crying, begging my husband to defend me. They laughed. I will never forget that sound. Victoria's cold chuckle, Christopher's deep, mocking laugh, Bethany covering her mouth, but not hiding her smile, and Daniel, still silent, but his shoulders were shaking like he was trying not to join in. I realized in that moment that I'd married a coward who'd never loved me enough to choose me over their approval. Victoria went upstairs and came back with my suitcase. She'd already packed my things. She threw it out the front door, onto the driveway, and told me to leave. Christopher pulled out his checkbook and wrote a number with so many zeros I couldn't process it. He held it out to me and said, "This is more money than someone like you would ever see. Take it, leave our son alone. Disappear." I looked at Daniel one last time. He finally met my eyes, and do you know what he said? Maybe they're right. Maybe this was a mistake. I left that check on the table. I picked up my suitcase in the freezing rain, and I walked away from that mansion. I had $300 in my bank account, a failing startup, no family nearby, and a baby coming in 2 months. I called my best friend, Imani, and she picked me up from the side of the road. I moved into her spare bedroom that night. Daniel texted me the next day with divorce papers already drawn up. He'd planned this. They'd all planned this. I gave birth to my daughter alone. Imani drove me to the hospital, held my hand, became my family. I named her Lyric because even in my darkest moment, she was my song of hope. Daniel never came to the hospital, never called, never met his daughter. The divorce was finalized when Lyric was 3 months old. He agreed to minimal child support and walked away completely. The Whitmores got what they wanted. I was gone, and they never had to acknowledge that beautiful little girl existed. For weeks after Lyric was born, I couldn't get out of bed except to feed her. I'd replay that night over and over, hearing their laughter, seeing Daniel's silence. I felt worthless, dazed, destroyed. But one morning I looked at Lyric sleeping in her bassinet, and something shifted. I realized that they didn't get to define my worth. They'd thrown me away like garbage, but I wasn't garbage. I was Natasha Cole, and I had a daughter who needed to see her mother stand back up. My startup had one interested client before everything fell apart, a small hospital in an underserved neighborhood. I'd been too distracted by wedding planning and pregnancy to follow up properly. I called them back. I poured everything into that pitch. I brought Lyric with me in her carrier because I had no childcare. I showed them how my AI software could help their patients navigate care, translate medical information, connect with resources. They gave me a chance, one small contract. I worked like someone possessed. Lyric would sleep, and I'd code. She'd wake up, I'd feed her, then code more. I lived on 4 hours of sleep and pure determination. That first contract led to another, then another. Hospitals started seeing real results. Patients were getting better care, fewer people were falling through the cracks, health outcomes were improving in communities that had been ignored forever. Within a year, I had contracts with 20 hospitals. Within 2 years, major healthcare networks were calling. Tech giants wanted to buy my company. I said no to every offer. I wasn't building this to sell. I was building this because it mattered, because my grandmother mattered, because every person who'd ever been dismissed by the medical system mattered, and maybe, somewhere deep down, because I needed to prove to myself that I was worth something. I scaled aggressively. I hired the best team. I reinvested every dollar back into the company. By year 3, we were international. By year 4, my company was valued at over $2 billion. I became one of the youngest Black woman billionaires in technology, and I did it all as a single mother. But here's the thing, I kept it quiet. I stayed off social media. I did interviews, but kept my personal life private. I'd changed my name back to Cole after the divorce. I focused on Lyric and my work. Daniel never checked on his daughter, not once in 5 years. The Whitmores had no idea what I'd become. To them, I disappeared into obscurity, exactly like they wanted. Then came the invitation. The International Philanthropy Summit, one of the most prestigious events in the world, wanted me as their keynote speaker. They wanted me to announce my new foundation, $500 million dedicated to healthcare accessibility in marginalized communities. The summit was in my city, the same city where the Whitmores still ruled socially. When I looked at the donor list, I saw their names. Victoria sat on the board. It was perfect. The night of the summit, I wore a custom midnight blue gown that cost more than Daniel's car. My natural hair was styled in an elegant updo. Lyric sat in the VIP section with Imani, wearing a little dress that made her look like a princess. She was 5 years old, beautiful, brilliant, and she'd never known her father's rejection. Because I'd filled her life with so much love, she never felt the absence. The ballroom was packed with billionaires, celebrities, politicians, and in the front row sat Christopher, Victoria, Bethany, and Daniel, with his wife Catherine. They'd gotten married just like Victoria planned. When the MC announced my name, Natasha Cole, CEO and founder, keynote speaker, I watched their faces from backstage. Confusion at first. The name meant nothing to them. Then I stepped into the spotlight, and Victoria's champagne glass actually slipped from her hand. Christopher's face went pale. Bethany's mouth fell open. Daniel looked like he'd seen a ghost. Catherine looked confused, wondering why her husband suddenly couldn't breathe. I told my story to that room of 1,000 people. I didn't name the Whitmores, but I told the truth. I talked about being rejected while pregnant, about being laughed at while crying, about being told I wasn't good enough. I talked about giving birth alone and raising my daughter as a single mother while building a company that would change healthcare forever. I talked about every door that closed and how I built my own doors. My voice never shook. I'd cried all my tears 5 years ago on their marble floor. When I announced that my foundation's primary mission would be to fund programs and communities rejected by old money institutions, everyone in that room knew exactly what I meant. The applause was deafening. Reporters were already typing. Social media was exploding. And the Whitmores sat there, frozen, as their world started to crumble in real time. After the speech, Victoria found me backstage. She actually tried to hug me. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd been protecting her son, that surely I could understand. Christopher was right behind her, already talking about partnership opportunities, investment possibilities. He needed money. I'd done my research. Their real estate business was failing. Bad investments, changing markets, and Christopher's arrogance had destroyed the family fortune. Bethany tried to tell me she'd always liked me, that it was just Victoria who was cruel. The lies were pathetic. Then Daniel appeared, with Lyric's photo from the summit program in his hand. He stared at it like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He asked if that was his daughter. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You gave up that right 5 years ago when you chose silence." He tried to explain, to justify, to somehow make me understand that he'd been confused, that he'd made mistakes, that he wanted to make things right. Catherine stood behind him, finally understanding why her husband looked so broken. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply told them the truth in front of the reporters who'd followed them backstage. I told Victoria she'd laughed while I cried, and I didn't need her apology because I'd needed her humanity, and she'd proven she had none. I told Christopher he'd tried to buy my silence, but I'd built something he could never purchase with all his money: integrity. I told Daniel he'd chosen silence when I needed his voice, and now Lyric and I had built a beautiful life where we didn't need him. Then I introduced them to Lyric. I called her over from Imani, and she ran to me with that pure joy only children have. I knelt down, and told her these were people I used to know. Daniel tried to say something to her, tried to call himself her father. Lyric looked confused and said, "Das stimmt instead. I don't have a daddy. But mommy says that's okay, because we have each other, and that's enough." She smiled at him, polite but distant, because he was a stranger. He'd made himself a stranger. The story went viral within hours. Every news outlet picked it up. Social media exploded with support for me and fury at the Whitmores. People dug up the family's history, found other people they'd mistreated, exposed their prejudices and cruelty. Business partners distanced themselves. Their social standing evaporated overnight. Catherine filed for divorce within a week. Turned out she had standards after all. Their real estate company's stock plummeted as investors pulled out. They became pariahs in the very social circles they'd valued above everything else. But I wasn't done. My foundation's first major initiative was purchasing the Whitmore family's struggling real estate portfolio. Not for revenge, for transformation. Every luxury property they'd built to showcase their wealth, I converted into affordable healthcare clinics. The buildings that once represented their pride now served the communities they'd looked down on. Their family name stayed on the buildings, but now it meant something different. Now it meant redemption, whether they wanted it or not. 6 months after the summit, Victoria tried one more time.